Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this radio show, this blog talk radio show about your Kundalini awakening experiences. My name is Chrism, and I, along with my co-host, Amelia Centara, welcome you to this edition of Kundalini Awakening with Chrism. And I want to really start out by doing the sound check first and foremost. So, Mary Jean or Vincent or Bruno Rodriguez. Hello, Bruno. If anybody could let me know if the voice is coming through, that would be very helpful. Let me know if the people in the chat room are hearing that voice. And it looks like Amelia was having a bit of a problem with Skype, and so she seems to be able to come in right now. But Mary Jean is typing, and looks like the sound is working. So we will just go right ahead and begin this program. One of the first things I want to talk about is split viewing, or how, when the Kundalini comes up within you, how you can be able to see other things that are there that other people cannot see. And this, as you go deeper into this area of the Kundalini, this can become quite a significant challenge to an individual to determine which is the living being. So, for instance, if you have a dead person and you have a living person standing next to each other, they both look like they're living people to you, because you're seeing both outside of the divide between the limited five senses and the spiritual world. You're seeing both at the same time. This is, if you take two circles and you intersect them, you form an oval shape that is called a Vesika Pisces. And what you're being able to do with the Kundalini Awakening is you're able to view both worlds at the same time. And the important thing to do is to be able to discern which one is real and how it applies to you. Very important to do that, especially if you're under attack by entities. Not everybody who's under attack by entities is going to be able to see them. Sometimes you are. I was able to, but sometimes you are not. Sometimes you're not allowed to see them because your development doesn't require that inclusion into your equation. And so at the time, you may be controlled by entities, but you won't be able to see them. And this further confuses an individual, because we usually equate that which we see as that being real. And this is a truth. This is a truth. Typically, when we see a tree in our physical environment, well, we can rest assured that that tree is real. However, if you have a Vesika Pisces overlay of the world behind the veil, there could be a tree there that isn't really there in the physical. But it will seem as if you're seeing it on the physical. And when you are in the spiritual realm itself becomes the physical, and so therefore that tree is real. But what you're getting is two-dimensional overlays. You got a dimensional overlay of the physical world as you and I know it, 5 or 6 senses worth, and then you have the spiritual behind the veil dimension, which is much bigger, and it also has its own landscape and its own creatures and its own plant life and its own levels of reference points for you to be able to understand what it is you're seeing. And so the interesting thing is for you to be able to really begin to discern that which is within the physical and that which is within the spiritual, and to make the decisions based upon those two realities intersecting within your visual cortex. See, this is the thing. You'll see them both at the same time, and then, you have to learn how to discern which is real and which isn't. With that being said, there are also emotional overlays. There are also levels of emotion and karma that we can experience here in the physical, but without knowing or even having a visual understanding of where they are in the behind the veil. So it's like a psychic, spiritual, emotional content will exist in the behind the veil, and that may have an effect upon you in front of the veil or within the veil of separation between the spiritual dimension and the physical dimension. And this is something that an entity would use as a way to connect to you or to get a hook into you by seeing that which you would be feeling on a karmic level and trying to extrapolate some sort of a corruption based upon what they have there to use within your karmic individuation, within the individual karmic process that you have going with yourself. And so it's important for you to understand that even though you're based in a 5 sense within the veil physical dimension, the totality of what you are exceeds far beyond the limitations of the physical. It goes into the mental dimension, the causal reality. It goes into these areas, and it all kind of funnels down to the individual that is within the veil, but with that veil in place. That veil acts as a specific level of filtration that doesn't allow you to have access to this information. If you had access to this information, you wouldn't be able to honestly work through your karma as you're being asked to do with the Kundalini. Kundalini is very, very clear, excuse me a moment, about wanting a person to work through their karma in this lifetime. And as I've mentioned before, when you're a child, there's a lot of karmic work for a person to do. And they don't get a choice in it. When you're a child, you have to live in the world that your parents provide for you. And your parents, typically not awakened parents, your parents will provide for you in the best way that they can, or, conversely, in the worst way that they can, depending upon their karma and what the agenda is for you from the Kundalini. And from there, you'll be forced to face whatever karma is in store for you with regards to your Kundalini development. And this is not the same as a child or a person that isn't coming into the Kundalini awakening in this lifetime. They most certainly have karma to face, but they don't typically have the severity of the karma that the Kundalini awakening person will have. And that is simply because, in order to have specific levels of Kundalini awakening, a person has to live through specific levels of karmic redemption in order to achieve higher and higher and higher levels of Kundalini awakening. And this is very important for people to understand because it's not always clear. It's not always clear within the Kundalini context that, wow, I had some really, really, really hard childhood trauma. Therefore, the logical assumption would be, therefore, I must be able to make it to a higher place. Well, this is true. This is true. But you have to be willing to accept it. And typically, people come out of severe karmic redemption, they're a bit gun shy to any kind of a development that is challenging to them. Karma can be really, really, really tough on a person, and that karmic toughness can make a person a bit gun shy in how they are willing to accept and go further and further and further into the heavenly fields with regards to the Kundalini and the continued challenges to the egoic expression that would entail. Really, the thing that is blocking us the strongest is the ego, is the attachment to our ego control over our lives. And a lot of you will be thinking, oh, well, I don't have that much ego control in my lives. I don't, my ego is not telling me what to do. I meditate, I do my practice, I listen to my Kundalini. But even that I part of you that is saying, I do this and I do that, can be formed as a defensive structure, a structure that is saying, oh, well, you know, and you know, and that whole idea of the falseness of fairness, or parity comes into the equation, and that comes into the equation quite often within the egoic structure of the Kundalini awakening person. You want to be treated like everybody else. You want to be treated fairly with regards to how that should look and feel inside of the mundane world, and therefore, if you're being treated fairly in the mundane world, well, of course that should be happening in the Kundalini world too, right? Well, that's not always the case. Kundalini doesn't really care about being fair to you or you having parity. Kundalini doesn't really, ask that you attach yourself to an expectation that if you do something right, then you'll get a reward, or if you do something good, then you won't have to do as many bad things, because we're not always looking at cause and effect in a micro, which is typically how the 5 sense person perceives it. We're looking at cause and effect from a large area of karmic conversion, and the karmic conversion tables are really, really spread out over the millennia of the lives that your souls have been taking lives. Everything that you did to earn yourself the awakened crown chakra, it comes into play inside of this karmic redemption, these karmic tables of redemption. And so you don't want to really look at the Kundalini as a reflection of cause and effect that we have here in the physical, behind the inside of the veil of forgetfulness. It's a very, very different equation when you go outside of that veil. And let's face it, once you go outside of that veil has been ruptured. And unless you have some sort of a memory wipe, you don't get to forget what you've experienced behind the veil. And typically what you've experienced behind the veil, well, let's just say that, just to clear that up a little bit, the veil of forgetfulness surrounds the physical dimension with regards to the psychic access that a typical mundane person will have. When the person, say, comes into a Kundalini awakening and that veil of forgetfulness is ruptured, well, it's ruptured right into the next dimensional level that has a lot of the lower vibes that physicality, being one of the lowest vibrations, can have. And so that's really, you're rupturing into what the Christians would know as a hell zone, Hell zone, and all of the weird little creatures and problems that happen to exist right next to the lowest vibration of physical dimension. So the highest level of, I think I've said this before on the program, the highest level of spiritual physicality you can have begins to intersect with the lowest level of spiritual creation that is placed right outside of the dense physical vibration. And so you can run into, this is where people get a lot of entity interaction. We call entities any kind of a spiritual consciousness that is self-aware and that often has an agenda of corrupting a Kundalini person's awakening equation or activation equation. And before I go any further, I would go ahead and like to introduce a person here who's been very, very helpful to many people in the various Kundalini awakening systems groups across the board on Facebook and in Yahoo and on some of her own sites. And I'd like to welcome my co-host, Amelia Santara. Hello, Amelia. See if your Skype is truly working. There you are.
It's working, I think.
Oh, you've got good sound.
Yeah.
Good sound.
Good. I don't know what happened. It just completely shut down, and I had to go look for my password, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, yeah,
so,
yeah.
that's what
I'm lucky to have that one memorized. It's good to hear you.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
Would you like to make any announcements?
Yeah, well, I will make the announcement where people can go if they would like to make a donation. So the donation site is www.chrism-kundalini.blogspot.com. Let me say that again. www.chrism-kundalini.blogspot.com. And the donate button is there, and all donations they're gratefully received. And that's that announcement, chrism. There is also the announcement that I can make of the seminar. Will I do that now?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there's a seminar happening in Berlin, and this is happening on the 3rd and 4th of September. And Manisha Manish is organizing it. I don't actually have her email in front of me right now, but I will get it before the end of the show. But the dates are 3rd and 4th of September. That's the Saturday and the Sunday. It's the first weekend in September. Everybody is welcome. If you're living in Europe, if you're listening to this announcement, please do consider coming. Chrism doesn't actually come to Europe that often. It's been a while since he's been here giving a seminar. He visited London last year and gave a wonderful presentation in London. But this is his own seminar. This is his 2-day seminar. So that hasn't happened in Europe for a while. And it's an opportunity to come and to talk with him and to discuss and look at your own process and where you are at. If you already have an awakening, this is so beneficial. I can't emphasize how wonderful it is to be able to do this. If you're in a position where you would like to have an awakening, well, then you are also most welcome to come. So that's it. It's happening on the first weekend in September, 3rd and 4th. And before the end of the show, I will also give the email address that you can write to, as well as contacting Manisha Manish on the Facebook groups.
Excellent, my dear. Thank you very much for that. And so I want to continue with this understanding that karmic redemption, and the emotions that operate outside of the veil of forgetfulness, the separation of our memories of what we have done, who we have done, what we have done to other people. I know that went way wrong. I just don't think anything. What we have done to other people, I should say, and how that affects our current status within the Kundalini awakening. No. I'm getting some feedback from that last statement. Yikes. Anyway, so with regard to the karmic redemption, even though you have the activation and you're inside of the awakening, there still is more karma to be untangled from. And for those of you that have a very, very, very wild and strong karmic redemptive process while you're inside of your Kundalini process, basically speaks of levels of grace that are continuously opening up to you, that are continuously offering itself there for you to surrender to, and for you to really be able to learn from and glean from that offering the greater levels going into your process. Some of you, are already at a very, very, very high level, and even though you may not, because you're so familiar with yourself by now inside of this Kundalini process, you may not even realize the level of power and the level of beautiful radiance that is being exerted upon the population from you. And for those people, it's the most important thing is to give of that love, give of that grace, give of that forgiveness, give of that tolerance, give of that honesty, give of that patience, give of that selfless service. For those of you that are kind of constantly within a very, very high spin state of the Kundalini, really begin to devote your time into these areas. It's extremely beneficial, and that in turn, those noble qualities in turn open up even higher levels for a person to merge into while they're within the Kundalini awakening process. It's difficult for a person, I think, and it's incorrect really for a person to assume that a Kundalini awakening process is very, very linear and logical. It isn't. The past and the future can happen at the same time. Think about that. The past, which has already occurred, and the future, which already has not occurred, can happen at the same time, which equals a split present. Okay. It's very, very, very difficult to manifest an understanding of Kundalini, from a logical, linear perspective. You want to really just understand that it can do things that are impossible for our conscious minds to be able to make sense of. That doesn't mean that it's going to be wrong, or typically the Kundalini does not make mistakes. That's one of the few absolutist things. Maybe not few. I don't know. It's hard to keep track. But that is an absolute. Divinity does not make mistakes. Kundalini is the divine. Therefore, the divine within you that is changing you and transforming you and working through you does not make mistakes. And you need to understand that. You need to embrace that and allow that understanding to come through to you. And I'm being given the signal by my Shakti to come over and introduce Elizabeth Dalton Gonzalez. Elizabeth Dalton Gonzalez has a very strong spiritual resume. She has worked within the Kabbalistic techniques, and lately she went down and she had a fairly very strong and beautiful experience with the ayahuasca in Peru. And I would like to welcome you, Elizabeth. Hello.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good. Very good.
And tell me, how are you feeling within this karmic redemptive state that you may be currently within? And how is your Kundalini treating you with regards to levels of communication about that redemptive state? How do you feel about that, Elizabeth?
Well, I was going to ask you, as you were talking just now about split viewing in this, I don't think that this comes under the same, I'm not sure. But first, I've been getting this whole thing about, I was speaking to a dear friend yesterday about unconditional love. And then I got this whole thing about looking, just about my Kundalini, talking about getting a flow of words about looking through the veil of unconditional love, like it was the word eyepiece. To look through the eyepiece of unconditional love first. For me, now, when I'm looking at someone, when I'm feeling like the Kundalini is coming through and doing some type of healing for them, she's now asking of me to actually look through it. It's like the eyepiece or the veil of unconditional love, to see through that and let that unconditional radiance of unconditional love flow through me, to let that surround that person. And then I went to work, and I was given this where it just says, I open up to life and assistance through unconditional love. I am worthy of this grace, to be this grace in the benefit to humanity now. And so I felt like that is sort of what I'm supposed to be, and along with the other Stacy's, and she was saying something about looking through unconditional love at the other state, and then all the other Stacy's, but using the unconditional love sort of as the filter. Maybe that's the word, like the filter.
Well, I think that's very valuable information. And I think it's always good to look through the lens of love, but I think people need to understand what the idea of unconditional love pertains to. Love can have many, many conditions attached to it. And, our love can have attached to it the programs of our society. And in essence, it must have those attachments to it, because this is what we know. This is how we've been raised. This is what our Kundalini has chosen for us to awaken within. But is love not sometimes strict? Is love not sometimes torturous? Is love not sometimes so heavy in its correction that we lose our sense of self, we lose our sense of identification, we lose our sense of our pathway within this? I mean, do you ever feel that love is not clear?
Mm-hmm.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, within these levels of love, where do you set the unconditional? Where's the unconditionalism of the unconditional love? So it's just not making judgments about people, or is it loving everything equally? I mean, where are you summoning up that eyepiece within yourself to look into another person's process or how they're affecting you? And what levels of discernment are you consciously making from an ego perspective versus the perspective of the Kundalini? And which do you choose? And which do you truly begin to operate from?
Right.
And so I think there's a huge level of discernment. I mean, so for instance, when I work with people, sometimes I have to be very, 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 very hard and very, very, very strict, and continuously so. So a person looking at it from the outside is going, "Oh my God, what an absolutely horrendous person this guy is," and yet from inside of the equation, there's tremendous levels of love being imparted, because this person is being given an opportunity to excel beyond what they had been ever able to do before that level of tough love was initiated upon them. How does your Kundalini feel about that, Laranya?
Yes, absolutely.
And so because I really, really do, I do really support what she says about using unconditional love, and I'm just going to add something to it. Using unconditional love as we know it, as we are able to discern it and express it through ourselves into that level of filtration that we interact with other people within, right?
Yeah.
You can't do what you don't know, right?
Right.
And so, within that context, I think it really dovetails well with what I was talking about with regards to karmic redemption, and using split viewing as a way of viewing outside of the veil and inside the veil at the same time. And understanding that as you view outside of the veil, you're seeing what your karma allows you to see. You will not see everything that is existent outside of the veil. You just won't. You wouldn't be able to understand it. You have no reference points for it. But if you look outside the veil with what Laranya is saying, and Laranya, I'm using Laranya Spanish for the spider, which is what Elizabeth Kundalini basically goes within, and that's what we have been calling her for quite some time. And she has appeared to Elizabeth as a spider as well, so that's where the name comes from. But as you look outside of the veil through the eyepiece of unconditional love, you might be able to see a lot more than if you just split view the outside of the veil, say looking at your ancestral line, or what entities may be hopping about, bothering people or not bothering people. What the flora and fauna of the outside the veil reality is. And I'm sorry for not explaining the connection with split viewing as well as I should have, Elizabeth. But I think that's a very, 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 that's a super understanding that your Kundalini is given into this, to be able to look through the eyepiece of unconditional love first. And I also want to add that the Kundalini will give a person much stronger levels of understanding what unconditional love is through its own interaction with the individual. In a way, as it interacts with the individual, people are compelled to understand what levels of love are, what levels of love excite a blissful response, or excite a profound wisdom moment, or excite a level of interaction that the energy and the consciousness of the Kundalini will have on an individual as they begin to participate, actively, consciously participate, which I think your Kundalini is suggesting, Elizabeth, actively participating within an understanding of unconditional love. And I'll suggest that you do it all the time. Look through that eyepiece. Let that eyepiece become your visual cortex so that you begin to constantly dance the dance of unconditional love as you interact with your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and psychological realities. And this will make things much, much smoother for an individual. Have you had that experience, Elizabeth? Have you been able to start seeing things from a...
and I think that's what she's asking, that now that's what needs to occur. And all the little, who knows where all the little mental or things that you think that, when you're coming into contact with just a variety of experiences during the day, it really helps to diminish those so that you're not overthinking things, you're not letting your mind just wander into scenarios that don't exist or have no...
Overanalyzing everything,
Exactly, or going into emotional areas that don't even have anything to do with... It just gets in the way. So it's not beneficial.
We're talking about the monkey mind.
And it's just completely not beneficial to any of it. And I don't know, I don't think this qualifies as split viewing because it's right before I go to sleep when I go with, like when I'm meditating, I go within, doing my mantra. But last night she's taking me through visual doorways. I could see where it's, there's actual scenarios, people doing things on the astral, I don't know, but she was giving me choices of going into different places again and practicing with the eyepiece, practicing watching a scenario of people doing certain things, and she had me I'm not physically there, obviously, but you feel like you're physically there. But instead of having, like I usually have a bird's eye view, and I'm flying over, I was going through like a door and into a whole situation, and I just watched it unfold, and I'm just standing there radiating and trying to, and she kept saying again, look through the eyepiece of unconditional love at this scenario. What do you do? What do you think? What do you don't. You don't. There's no need to do anything but just be in that moment.
Well,
so
now,
I kind of felt like
when you're looking through the eyepiece of unconditional love, and you see somebody that is, or somebody comes into your presence that is really, really, really communicating and interacting with you from a heavy egoic sense, where does your unconditional love go? How do you expand the unconditional love to interact and to encompass what that person is doing with you or to you or around you?
Well, and she's saying in regard to that, lead by example. There's not really anything you should step in. Your Kundalini may step in and do something, but there's no need for your ego to react. Look through the eyepiece of unconditional love. Sometimes you have to let that person just be who they are and what they do. And if an opportunity opens itself to where you could help or give an example of the opposite behavior, in other words, to show them there's a different way to go about that, or always just be the opposite around them and hope that you'll be of help to them? I mean, if you're not their teacher, you're not in a position where you need to be doing that. And at the same time, if you're leading by the way you conduct yourself, can be really helpful to other people. And so I think that's just being loving, being unconditional, loving towards them. And sometimes it even means accepting that they may not learn that lesson in this lifetime, that it may take them a few more. And your judgment of that is unnecessary. I mean, you can always think that to yourself later on or something, but you could think of ways you might possibly be able to help. But other than letting your Kundalini be in control and do something that's necessary, you just need to be a loving presence in that person's life. I mean, even if you don't know them, as a perfect stranger, you're standing there listening to them going, oh dear. But would jumping in other words, and saying something or coming back combative or causing conflict or any of that isn't going to help that situation anyway.
Do you think that love can be modulated in the forms of being corrective or combative?
I guess so. Combative against the ego, you mean?
Combative, like say the person is hurting you physically in some way. Do you think that, and the Kundalini's allowing it, because she's say the Kundalini's testing you in certain ways. Do you feel that unconditional love, or I should say love itself, let's just say divine love, is divine love not able to be injuriously corrective?
Yeah. I don't know that if someone were physically harming you, that your Kundalini might also give you a way to walk away from that you wouldn't want to stay in that. But sometimes there's karmic reasons why, like you were saying earlier, a person is in an abusive situation, and a bit of that needs to occur before you're able to change that.
I think it's interesting. I think that, what I receive from my Kundalini is that love is a many, many, many faceted diamond gem. And some of those facets are not as sugary sweet as, sugar plum fairies, dancing on the horizon of unconditional love. Sometimes love has a level of purity within itself, but conditioning upon those that it's vectored at.
Yeah.
Does she agree with that?
Yes.
And I think that sometimes when you're inside of a paradigm of difficult loving interaction, that the Kundalini will actively take over your choice with regards to how you get to respond. And though, I also agree with what you're saying and your Kundalini is saying about always look through the eyepiece of non-judgmental or unconditional love, but realize that even though you're looking through that eyepiece, your Kundalini may not respond the way your reference points for unconditional love may be.
Oh, yeah.
She'll step right outside of that box.
Yep.
Wow, I think that's a very, 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 very powerful level of information and teaching that she's given us. And I would like to say thank you to you and Loranya for bringing that in. And I want to keep you on the phone, but I also want to bring Santara in on this. And Santara, what are your thoughts about this?
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you, Elizabeth and chrism. Unconditional love for me means what? It means, I think, not withholding my love from the person, regardless of their actions or their behaviors towards me. But that doesn't mean that I don't take action that they mightn't like.
Give us an
but
example.
It does mean, Chris. Well, I can't think of anything this minute, but I mean, say in terms of my children, I don't withhold my love from them, even though their behavior and their actions might be very judgmental of me, very critical. I still allow my love to, I like that expression, that I piece of unconditional love, because it means I don't withdraw my love. I still allow it to radiate and to be there, but I may not just ignore what's happening. I may need to take some action that they won't like.
Basically, what we're talking, which is basically what the Kundalini does to us.
Yes, absolutely. And what's interesting is, as my process is moving forward, split viewing, I don't know about the term, if it's the same thing, but sometimes what the Kundalini does for me is a person is, we'll say, behaving in a particular way, and at that very same time, I will begin to see other things about the person around them.
Right?
Yes, or I will get emotional, I will get stuff that I understand. I'm given to understand some stuff that has, let's say, this behavior is rooted in. And I feel a compassion rise in me for that helps me to be more unconditional love, for that to develop. But it definitely doesn't mean that I say nothing. Sometimes,
Well, I can give you an
I
example.
think we need to.
I had an example just happened to me yesterday. I was in line at the grocery store, and a homeless gentleman came up, and if you split viewed him, you could see that the entities were fully controlling this individual. This individual had multiple chemical dependencies, looked like he'd just come out of jail, was from LA, and was like 600 or 700 miles away from where he was. And I got all this because he was telling me this as I'm in the checkout line putting my food on the little conveyor belt, and he comes up and he's kind of condescending that I'm buying this food and he doesn't have any, and he wanted me to buy him some food, and he kept changing the subject, and I could see that basically the entity within him had selected me because that entity could see that I had a strong level of compassion. And so that entity directed him over to me in order to get something from me that he wanted or that he needed. And frankly, I wasn't interested in playing that game with that entity. But I also realized that the Shakti brought that interaction to me for a purpose, for a reason. And so I went ahead, and after I'd paid for my food, and he had been escorted out already, but I went ahead and bought him the food that he had asked for. I went over and I shopped again, and I stood in line again, and I paid for the food that he had requested. And then I went outside to look for him, and he was nowhere to be found. Okay. So when you split view and you see the entity interaction, sometimes you're not even dealing with the consciousness of the individual. You're dealing with the consciousness of an entity that is using a person like a finger puppet. And this is something that you want to discern. Now, you can still go through, I feel, the actions of unconditional love, but it isn't really unconditional because there are certain conditions that are being placed upon it. Do I have the money to buy that person food? Do I have an appointment that I have to make? so that it takes the time that I'd be able to stand in line or shop for the food, stand in line, pay for the food, find the individual. When you're looking at it through that eyepiece, Elizabeth, what does Lorania say?
She's saying beyond all of that, the ability, whether or not that's okay. Looking through the eyepiece doesn't have to, if that occurs, in other words, where you don't have the money, you're not in the position to do that, that's okay. She's saying you're still looking at it with unconditional love. You still are willing to do what you can do or can't do or say what you need to say if it's necessary with an entity or whatever. The fact that you're in a willingness to is what it is. It doesn't have to play out necessarily in a way that's pleasing to, you know what I mean? Like, you didn't find him, you weren't able to give him that, and maybe or maybe not had a certain level of feeling like, I just thought that, and now he's not here. Geez, she said none of that.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with that. I figured I'd just eat the food if he wasn't there. But the thing is that what we're seeing, though, is we're seeing certain levels of conditioning placed upon this eyepiece of unconditional love. And I'm going to suggest a different term to describe this level of love, and I would just call it divine love. Because most of the levels of love that we're going to be able to work with and look through that eyepiece with is going to have certain levels of condition attached to it.
Yes.
With divine love, that includes conditioning and non-conditioning. Does she agree with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Santara, what does your Kundalini think of this?
Yeah, I was just thinking there, the eyepiece is for the ego, I think. It comes down in front of the ego, does it not?
I would say it comes to the higher mental functioning self, the Uhane, from the Huna perspective, but not from strictly from the egoic standpoint. The ego standpoint wouldn't be able to do the unconditional aspect of it, or at least even be able to attempt it.
No, I agree, but it is what is, okay, so you're saying the ego could never do that?
The ego typically won't be able to do that. I won't be absolutist, in that regard.
Yeah.
But, typically the ego is adorned with attachment and adorned with conditions.
But are we not, as Kundalini people, re-educating the ego towards that, the ego towards...
That's a very good question, and I'm going to suggest that even as we are within the activation or awakening stages of development, the ego aspect is still going to have its say and its pull upon the individual, which would definitely fly against doing certain levels of Kundalini manifestation of behaviors. It will fly against not having attachments, or it'll fly against not doing certain things with the body that perhaps the Kundalini wouldn't really suggest the person to do. And so even though you're educating the ego, that doesn't mean that education is going to be either immediately received or permanent in its expression.
Right. Yeah. And aren't you trying to rise up the ego to the higher functioning so that they meet at a higher place, and the ego is giving way to that unconditional love that the higher can better facilitate? I don't even know how to say that.
I would just tend to take it out of the whole unconditional. when we come into areas of divine intervention upon Kundalini awakened, activated, or the mundane populations, it has to really fall within a divine development, because divinity has access to everything, all the tools. Divinity has all the tools, and sometimes those tools have conditions attached, i.e., if you are hateful, if you are hurtful, if you are continuously, in a very damaging aspect of interaction with your fellow person, I'd say outside of a Kundalini teaching, that is going to have specific response to you as an individual and how your life is going to be experienced. So even though the love is present within the divine core, it is still being applied within levels of conditioning. Conditioning meaning the levels of love that the person can receive, i.e. through reference points or other experiences, and conditioning with regards to making the judgment about whether, A, B, or C is appropriate or not. Is that as clear as mud?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if you listen to it again, you'll be able to make some sense of it. And I'm going to thank you very, very much, Elizabeth. I think you have changed the vector of this conversation, and I'm willing to go there. And I'm going to put you in the blue, but I want to thank you and Loranya very much, Elizabeth.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And then, and I'm also going to put you in the blue center. I'm going to bring Rosemary into this conversation. And Rosemary, what's coming to you through your Kundalini with regards to the subject of the looking through the eyepiece of unconditional or divine love? What comes to you within that context? Oops, sorry, Elizabeth. It's right. There you go, Rosemary. My bad. There you are.
I want to thank, I don't know, I think, Elizabeth, it was you that said, even though we're looking for results or we want to make a difference, that it's the way we're being is really the main issue, and that inside. And I would say that when been in a couple of those circumstances, that would be really good to hold on to, because there is that chatter going on in our head of wanting to do the best thing and the right thing. And from this living, the kind of living that we do, we work against the judgments and we work towards forgiveness. So it's a moment of grace, I think, and surrendering to the grace within us and looking for guidance. I'm thinking of the times that I remember earlier in my Kundalini life. I remember particularly a gentleman in the middle of December being in the bitter cold, and it gets very cold here. And I was driving, and I could see him walking on the street. And my intention to make a difference, and I would think it was unconditional that I was able to do that, but I went 2 blocks down and went into the Goodwill and found something his size, and then kept at it till I could find him again on that street. There's something takes over in you, I think, when it's very strong like that.
Yes,
other times
agreed,
when
agreed.
I've been down in St. Paul, where the charities do feed the homeless 2 meals a day, I think, and you see them gathering, and I just get sad, and I don't feel as inclined in those moments to do things, although I have also.
Why would you get sad? Why would you feel sad?
I would get sad because of their situation, and I'm judging that, of course.
Well, I know. So when you look at it through divine love, is there the availability for sadness at their situation?
No. I see that.
Why not?
That it is.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why is there no availability for that?
I'm sorry, ask me that again, Kristen.
Why is there no availability for sadness when you look at those people in that situation through the lens of divine love?
Well, if you're being sad, when I'm being sad, I'm more absorbed by that than I am by putting that aside and getting into action. Providing.
What I'm suggesting is that through divine love, those people are exactly where they need to be. Are they not?
Yes.
You know,
Well,
this goes back to the whole unconditional aspect that Elizabeth and Lorania brought up. Unconditional. What does that mean? That means without condition. There is no condition.
I'm thinking of that of unconditional love, meaning of this full acceptance, at least that we learn. But what you're saying, it widens that to say unconditional in my mind of what their condition should be. That's my judgment.
That's your judgment, because you're making a judgment about what should be without knowing what their karma is.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and put you into the blue here and just kind of move on with this beautiful subject that Lorania and Elizabeth brought up. When we're looking at people and we're looking at ourselves, first of all, we don't even get to know our own karma. So if you have a series of really, really harsh things happen to you, and they really come out of the blue, almost by chance, if you believe in the whole chance thing, which probably is not real. Chance is more of an orchestration of divine intercession, more than it is something that is dependent upon luck. So when the divine orchestration occurs to you, for you to have your car broken into, or a business fail, or somebody pass away that will be very young, you have to look at the karmic incentive for those actions to have occurred at all. And those karmic incentives are not available to you, nor are they available to people who say, oh, yes, I work with the Akashic Records. No, they don't. They want to. They pretend that they do. They create that idea that they do, but they don't. People do not get to know what their karma is. Their karma is there as a means to support levels of innocence and honesty as we percolate the different levels of karmic life experience that we have from the past through the present matrix of living our lives, and in some cases, and in many cases, most cases, developing new karma. And I'm going to come back to Elizabeth here, and I think I'm going to come back. There she is. And so, with that in mind, Elizabeth, divine love is both conditional and unconditional. Is that something that Lorania agrees with?
Yeah. Well, and what was running through my mind when you were saying that, I was thinking also, when you ask the divine for a flesh teacher, you are asking for someone to look through that very divine, unconditional, conditional eyepiece at you, at your situation, and be able to truthfully guide you. It's not always going to be like you said. It's a diamond, different faceted. You don't want a teacher who's just going to say everything you do is just perfect and great and just continue right down that path. And, but with the human ego aspect of unconditional love, you would think that that's what it means, like, I'm just going to love you no matter what you do, but with the divine unconditional love, it isn't that. It is like you said, being able to also see people's situations, karmic repercussions, and refinements and things that they need to have happen. And if you're unconditionally divine love, you want that person to grow and to lift themselves up out of the situation so that they can move forward.
Exactly. And sometimes that growth period can seem, from our very, very limited consciousness, can seem quite harsh and quite difficult, especially when you're dealing with retraining the ego, as Amelia was talking about. Retraining that ego is not an easy process. But as I feel that your Kundalini is talking about is really to become actively semi-divine.
Yeah.
So that you create a life that is conscious semi-divinity. And the divinity comes from the Kundalini connection and the transformation that it's committing upon your five-body system. And your five-body system is therefore becoming expanded into beyond a five-body system. Clearly, half of the body is still within the five-body system. The other half of the body is in the unlimited divine system. Yeah. And the merging of those two, because we're already facilitated pretty much so within the physical system. What we need to learn and understand is opening ourselves into the divine, unlimited loving system. And I think that's what Laranya was suggesting with regards to the eyepiece. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a hugely important thing. And I think that the more you open to the divine love aspect within your semi-divinity, the more options you have within a loving context to give sustenance where no sustenance exists, to give helpfulness where no helpfulness exists, to give levels of strength and, searching for a word here, levels of strength and refinement where no strength or refinement currently exists. And that comes through your radiance as well. So if you're constantly thinking of like Rosemary, you know, she drives back past the homeless people, and I don't see homeless people in a sad state. That guy that came up to me in the marketplace, I didn't see him in a sad state. I saw him being totally possessed by entities by virtue of his choice and influenced choice and karma to addict himself to specific substances and to abuse those substances by virtue of being directed by negative entities that are there in the first place due to a karmic incentive that has allowed them to be with him since a very young age. This person is in the middle of his refinement zone. And even though I see that, I can still give that individual soul levels of divine love, and I can also treat that entity levels of divine love too. And I don't mean like, oh, nice little entity. Oh, come here. We're not talking about that. Okay. You can also give a person, your Kundalini can often give a person a level of clarity just for a moment to give them something to hold on to. And I think that my Kundalini reached into this individual as he was being dragged out of the grocery store, that maybe he needed to get his life, into an organized position where he could continuously burn the karma, but not create more through, say, the addiction, of the various chemicals that this gentleman had. Clearly remembering, what Laranya mentioned last week with regards to addiction being a resistance to Kundalini. And so, I think it's a very, very, very beneficial subject, but I like the idea of people living a divine, a semi-divine lifestyle, choosing semi-divinity over mundane expressions of love, choosing to have that advanced level of love that clearly we're not very, very well versed in, especially if we're operating from the ego in a very, very strong and harsh way. We don't want to allow the ego, and the divinity will not allow people to have specific skills that are being utilized by the ego. That may happen once or twice, but then, fairly soon the citic skill may leave that individual or be put on hold until that ego is educated to such a degree that they wouldn't use it, say, for self-aggrandizement or self-enrichment or, being able to cheat other people out of money or power or position by virtue of having an exalted skill set brought out by the Kundalini. You know what I mean there, Elizabeth?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Laranya. Thank you very much. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and ask Miss Santara here if she has collected any questions from any of the groups. Have you?
Yes, I have. I have indeed. So let me find them. Actually, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to give out that information on Manisha's email address. If you want to come to the seminar or if you just want more information or you want to connect with Manisha and ask her anything at all about the seminar, you can contact her at this email. It's Manisha, MANEESHA, at posteo.de. That's posteo.de.
And when Amelia says she also means a.
So that's MANEESHA at posteo.de. Okay, so that's it. Let me see now. Where are those questions? And here we go. Okay, the first question, I will ask you the ones that came in first of all to the to my email box to ask you on the radio chrism. The first one is, can severe illness of a spouse make a person spiritual and cause Kundalini activation?
Absolutely. Severe illness in a spouse also denotes strong levels of emotional focus, strong levels of emotional response and reactions, and in many cases, with an ill spouse or desperation within the emotional body, and that desperation and that reaching out and that need and that the fear that can be attached to that spouse maybe passing away or going into a coma or something like that can be very, very conducive to activating the Kundalini. And so, just like any kind of an emotional heartbreak can also do the same thing. When a person's emotional body has been so very much challenged in a way that allows the person to really reflect on themselves and to really, really go into levels of desperate emotional expression, that can begin to actuate Kundalini awakening inside that individual. Over.
Next question. I saw your message about Chrism coming to Berlin. That's super exciting, as he is a real source of light and knowledge for me. His posts and videos have really helped me through. So, is it possible to let me know what the details of the workshop include? Is it a seminar? How long is it for? What will the main topics be covered, etc.? Could you speak on that?
We'll be talking about billiards. We'll be talking about the different kinds of beer that can be had in Berlin, especially during Oktoberfest. We'll be talking about the Olympics and maybe some refugee statuses within Germany. What do you think? Does that dovetail with the seminars that you've attended, Amelia?
Not quite.
Well, I mean, geez Louise, there's 16 hours of didactic information and interaction. 16 hours, and so that's about 8 hours per day. And it's, we're actually working with the Kundalini, talking about the Kundalini, initiating Kundalini processes within people, initiating levels of trust, initiating levels of understanding. Information is power within a Kundalini context. Power over the indiscriminate fear that not knowing or having that unknown fear come upon you when the Kundalini comes upon you. We'll be talking about that and bringing levels of power to people within the seminar. I mean, everything that we talk about is Kundalini activation through awakening, and the different levels of understanding and information that pertain to those subjects. Oh, and on the second day, if people want to have a Shaktipat, well, then they can receive a Shaktipat, which is a jump start of their Kundalini process wherever it is, whether they're in the activated or awakened stage. It's an extra boost of energy from my Kundalini into their system. Over.
Thank you, chrism. The next question is, before I ask the question, I just want to say about this young man that he's not Kundalini activated, but he would like to activate his Kundalini, and he has been practicing the safeties for some time. And he's also in a fairly stressful situation, and he has been practicing the safeties doing this. And this is his question. For some days, I feel a warm blood circulation in my left leg and left hand. It is from toe to knee and palm to elbow. When it flows, it feels like warm air. What is this? Is it body weakness? It happens in standing and in the sitting position.
It's the beginning of Kundalini activation upon him. That's what it is.
Okay.
From toe to knee corresponds from finger to elbow as well. If you look at the simian state of being, you look at a gorilla. Gorilla's forearms and back legs, virtually they are four-legged instead of two-legged and two-armed. They're quadrupedal instead of bipedal, although they can go back and forth between the two states. From toe to knee and finger to elbow is the activation of contact points that the person within the pre-bipedal state within the evolution of the individual would have had happen to them if all four hand chakras and foot chakras were connected to the ground. And so basically this is pushing up through his evolutionary state and beginning to activate certain areas of his body within the stresses and practice that he's doing. And it does this. It does this for everybody within a certain degree. We go through the primal transformation energetically first. So we are all simian individuals. From a human standpoint, we all have the body of a great ape. Granted, it's been genetically tweaked here and there to remove the fur, unless you're over 50 and you're a man, to the fur, or to remove, certain aspects of what a great ape would have. If you look at a silverback gorilla, the cranium's different, the amount of fur is different, the size is different, but we still have simian ancestry from an animalistic genetic level. And that simian ancestry will be served. And the Kundalini will recognize that and begin to animate that process through the, shall we say, waves of warm air or also cool breezes on the face. That's another indication of Kundalini activation happening as well. And so as it happens from the toe to the knee and from the finger to the elbow, so is it beginning a process within this individual to activate itself within that body, but it's taking it stage by stage rather than having it all happen in one big swoosh. Over.
Thank you. And the left-hand side as well, Chris, and that would be significant, would it? The
Well,
left
it
leg and
happens,
it's the left.
is it just on the left side, or is it left and right?
No, just left. Left leg,
Well,
left
yeah,
hand, arm.
that would be an indication of a horseshoe activation going from the left on over the body to the right side. But yeah, that would be indication of the sacred feminine, the Shakti, the earth goddess, beginning her ministrations upon that individual.
Thank you, chrism. The next question. I read your introduction to the radio show during the week. Can my Kundalini be raised by Shaktipat on the radio?
Yes, yes. If people are within a karmic redemptive state or equation that allows the person to tie in to the Kundalini state coming through my voice, they can indeed have an activation sequence occur just by listening to the voice. And I would suggest that people who want to have this state happen to them to listen to this radio show, listen to all the radio shows, and let the voice of myself, the voice of my co-host Amelia, the voice of Elizabeth and Rosemary, and all the different people that we've had speaking on this show, almost all of them have had Kundalini activity in some way, shape, or form. Certainly with my voice, it's been shown to have the ability to carry Kundalini as a vector of force to a human hearing mechanism, and then from the hearing through the brain and into the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord into the seven centers, and from the seven centers to be able to ignite the first center, the first chakra at the base of the tailbone. Over.
Thank you, chrism. Do chakra colors have specific meaning?
They are frequencies of light. They are frequencies not only of light, but they are frequencies of activity. They are frequencies of feeling. They are frequencies of divine intervention. They are a multi-level frequency response that our perception will perceive as a specific color radiance along the color spectrum. And this will be universal to the human being. So, for instance, what we call Kundalini is what the shamans in the Amazon basin call red serpent energy. And they're very specific. They're not saying green serpent energy or black serpent energy. They're saying red serpent energy. And this coincides with other cultures, like say the Sanskriti culture, where the first chakra, what they call the Muladhara, is colored red, and so on and so forth. And if you look at the Aborigine within Australia, their dream time, they have a rainbow dream time, and that rainbow also corresponds with the chakra coloration as well. And so when we look at the base chakra and we look at, say, the brilliant, dark, beautiful red that comes from the base of the tailbone, and we move it up to the brilliant, sparkling, deep orange of the second chakra, we're basically looking at different frequencies of creation. Our energetic anatomy was created to hold specific frequencies in specific places on the body. So, as we're looking at the spine and we're looking at the different intersections of nerve plexi upon the spine, we're looking at pre-arranged levels of nervous systems meeting at the spine, and at that meeting point is where the chakra exists, and that meeting point is what begins to radiance itself as a very specific color frequency. So certain levels of nervous plexi meet at the second chakra, which causes that second chakra to be orange, and then yellow, and then green, and then blue, and then a dark purple, and then, of course, the multicolored aspect of the awakened crown, where all chakras lead to the crown. All chakras lead to heaven, the crowning glory at the top of the head, the thousand-petaled lotus in one of the civilizations we just brought up. And so, yeah, the frequency of color denotes frequency of nervous plexi existence there, but it also denotes certain levels of karma aptitude, certain levels of of where you're going to go to look at specific issues that come to the person as in the form of blockage. So if you're looking at, if you're say you have a lot of grudges or you have a lot of revenge issues, and so you're going to look to the heart. You're going to look to the green. You're going to look to the green of the earth and the green of the plants and how that green is so love oriented. You're going to look at the levels of love within yourself and all of the nervous plexi that come into the heart chakra area. And you're going to look at, well, is this grudge that I'm having a blockage, or is this revenge scenario that I have, is this appropriate to my spiritual development? And you'll make the appropriate decisions for yourself based upon that area of intersection on your spine. And as you go up and down the spine, you will virtually cover every level of human response and combination of human response that is typically able to be utilized by the Shakti within an individual for an activation or an awakening template. And once that template is established, then the person's karma will interspace, or will appear at each level of chakra expression. And so you'll have specific karma for the first chakra. You'll have specific karma for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, and so forth. And these levels of karma will begin to be met by the inner divine upon the individual, whether or not that individual knows about it or not. And so, the frequencies of color that exist within the chakra system, or the energetic anatomy, is fairly on purpose. It is designed that way. And let's expand it out. I mean, we literally have spines in every cell of the body, because every cell of the body has the capacity to form a complete body. And so with your approximately 17 to 21 trillion cells, you've got 17 to 21 trillion spines that exist within you, and each of those spines have the same frequency of color going up and down. They may not, but I think they do. They will mirror the level of chakra karmic placement that divinity will place within each of the chakras. So as your spine, your spinal cord is infused with Kundalini, the Kundalini will begin to initiate specific levels of karmic redemption or balancing within that spinal cord, and all the cells of your body will reflect that karmic template. And so, you're looking at a much larger paradigm of interaction with regards to the chakra color and placement on the spine and nerve plexi, because, each cell has that going on. And as our spine adopts a very specific frequency of response from a divine imperative, then all of the other cells in the body and those microspines, those nanos, we'll just call them nanospines, those nanospines will reflect the very quality of Kundalini. Is that clear as mud?
No, that's clear, very clear. Can I ask you, Chrism, would it be helpful to place colors, in your environment or in your home? Would that be a helpful thing to do? Let's say that there's work happening with your...
I would say it is helpful, but you wanna really find frequency of color, like cobalt blue for your throat chakra, and say like dark, deep ruby red for the first chakra, and a deep, vivacious, vibrant orange. Your eyes will tell you what it wants, and then you don't want to just, this is not like painting examples. You don't want to use paint. You want to try to use as sparkly a color as you can, as crystally clear color, light refractive color as you can. And some of the cultures know this. The ancient Chinese knew this. The ancient Sanskrit people knew this. And they would dress their statues in very, very, very sparkly and very, very lit up levels of color, simply because when you go outside of the body from a visual space, it's extremely brilliant. Colors are very, very, very brilliant. If you look at the movie, Robin Williams is in a movie called What Dreams May Come, and they're very clear about the vivaciousness of the colors that exist beyond the physical realm, but still having attachment to a person's expectation as they are in the non-physical realm, so that they can appreciate the vivaciousness of the color frequencies that they're being exposed to outside of the physical environment. And so, yeah, if you can replicate that color frequency as close as possible outside, from a divine standpoint into the physical standpoint, that can be very, very helpful in beginning a very, very strong appreciation of Kundalini in the body. My own personal experience with that was my mother bought me a really deep, dark red garnet ring when I was 14. And one night I was looking at that ring later in my life, like in my late 20s and 30s, and I was looking at that ring and looking at it through a bright light, like one of those bright office lights that you have right now, and that frequency of red, that deep, dark ruby red, literally gave me my very first experience of bliss. I didn't know what it was. I was just sobbing and crying with joy. It was so beautiful, so wonderful. And so this is why I say that you can influence your Kundalini activation or awakening through the levels of color that you surround yourself with. Over.
Thank you so much.
just
You've got a
second.
question there in the chat room, Chrism.
Oh, good. Thank you. And Alana Seeker says, is the dormant Kundalini in the tailbone region or sacrum region? It is in the tailbone, the coccygeal, the last three vertebrae of the coccyx. And I love that she, Alana Seeker writes the etymology of sacrum, which comes from the late Latin as sacrum, but it means sacred bone. Sacred bone. So yeah, very cool. Very cool. Thank you for that, Alana Seeker. And please go ahead, Amelia.
So now we're in the groups, Chrism. So there's two questions about dreams that involve snakes. The first one is, what is the meaning if I'm seeing a pregnant snake in my dream? And the person had 3 snakes following them, and they were running away. 2 were following them, and they were running away from them, and the other one was not pregnant, and that one didn't follow them. So two pregnant snakes chasing or following them, and this woman is running. And what would the significance of the pregnant snake be?
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So the 2 snakes would be the Ida and the Pingala. And the pregnancy aspect of the snake, well, Ida Pingala meaning the 2 channels that, if you look at the caduceus that the medical people wear on their lab jackets, you'll see a staff in the middle, and you'll see 2 snakes intertwining around that staff and going up to a winged area, and it's those 2 snakes, which in Sanskrit, the Sanskrit language, are called the Ida and the Pingala. And these Ida and Pingala are both male and female, sacred male, sacred female, and they are conduits or freeways or rivers of energy, of Kundalini energetic potential that come up the spine and infuse and take infusion from the specific chakras. And as the snakes are running towards her, well, basically the Kundalini is running to her. And the fact that they're pregnant means that they are pregnant with that Kundalini potential, and she should just stand still and let them come. That's the thing. That is the way to respond. And if there was there one snake that was not pregnant?
Yes, and not following her.
That would be the spine. That would be the spine itself that they wrap around. The Ida and the Pingala move energy. The spine holds energy. So the two rivers on either side will transport the energy. The spinal column itself will contain the energy of all the chakras, but also of the Kundalini. As the Kundalini begins to rise, well, then it takes over the spinal cord, and that spinal cord begins to change its function and becomes a conduit of a moving, conscious, energetic force. So she needs to just stop running away from the fear of snakes, that primal fear that we have of snakes and spiders and tigers and wolves and sharks and and the killer whales and anything of a top predatorial aspect. We need to really begin to relax our fears with. Hold still and let ourselves be infused by the Kundalini. And if that means being bitten by the snake, then you just let yourself be bitten. If that means being bitten by the spider, like Elizabeth Dalton Gonzalez was, well, then that means that you get to endure that. And so you have to get over your fears in order to allow this to occur to some degree. In other words, she's giving the Kundalini Sacred Mother is giving this woman an opportunity to run for the moment. But the Kundalini within this woman also knew that this question was going to be asked on this radio program, and specific levels of information were going to be given to this individual. And so from that knowledge source, the Kundalini can just sit and wait and see if this person is going to follow the advice that's being given. So you hold still and you let those snakes come into you. And yes, it'll be a very strange feeling most of the time. And you will begin to have this process of Kundalini. The pregnancy aspect means that there's extreme levels of potential that are waiting to come up from the base of your spine to the top of your head. The two snakes that are chasing her are already within her. They are those energetic conduits that transport the energy of chi or prana or actual Kundalini from the base of the spine itself into that person's physical vehicle. And so, yeah, she needs to hold still and let this occur. It's typically not going to go away. Not going to go away. So she is where she needs to be. She is asking questions on a group that is designed to answer questions in such a fashion.
Thank you, chrism. And the other snake was an anaconda was running behind my son in a dream. My son was quite frightened and he was trying to hide himself. What is the meaning of this, please? And thank you very much.
Well, that individual's Kundalini is actually chasing her son. She has a son of the age that she described. That's one of the understandings is there. That I've seen Kundalini come from mother to son, father to daughter, father to son, mother to daughter. I've seen it follow in the next generation of an awakened person's family. But there's another reason too that I didn't write when I answered that question is she can be shown her own son as a level of her own Kundalini as well. And so not only is the message for her son, the message is also for her at the same time. Over.
Okay. Can you say a bit more about that? The message is for her?
The message would be a communication to her ego as is being exposed to her by having her, I think he's like 10-year-old son running from an anaconda. Uh-huh. It's also it's her ego being used, or her son being used as a representation of her ego.
Okay, thank you, chrism.
Yes.
What does seeing it's another dream? No, this isn't a dream. Actually, this was real. What does seeing an owl mean in the Kundalini context? The other night I saw a baby owl at my front door, and it was a very odd thing to see. And I would like to know if it is a Kundalini symbol.
Well, an owl at your front door, I mean, even though this happened in real life, I'm still looking at answering it from a Kundalini dream interpretive quality. Owls consistently throughout the last 2,000-3,000 years have been associated with levels of wisdom. The hunter in the night. Very few other birds are awake when the owl is flying under the light of the moon, under the light of the sacred feminine, under the light of that which we call Shakti Kundalini. So if an owl is a baby owl, is at somebody's front door, well, the baby owl would represent levels of first generation wisdom being offered to the person. A level of beginning and activated or activation, awakening stages of reality within the real life of the individual. Once again, this is not a dream. This is a real deal. Somebody really had a baby owl outside their door. And I believe it was an area that is not known to have owls.
Mm-hmm.
And so as this person has the owl in front of their door, i.e. in front of their dwelling, i.e. in front of the place where they live inside of, also to be looked at in a place where their soul is dwelling, such as the soul lives in the body and the body lives in the house. Well, levels of new and young energy and wisdom are being offered to that person's domicile, body, and engagement within that house and body and soul. And so you can see the baby owl as two things. You can see that maybe you've got a mouse problem, or from a Kundalini context, you're being offered levels of wisdom that can come to you from the mouth of babes, so to speak. So maybe pay attention to younger children in your life, or maybe pay attention to the young Kundalini as it begins to come into you with strong levels of wisdom that you would not have been able to even hear, let alone think about. Open the door to wisdom. Open the door to the wisdom of grace. Come as a child, i.e., come as a young owl. Okay. Accept the wisdom of that young owl that perhaps that person is becoming by virtue of their Kundalini activation, if they're having one, or that they can become when they do begin to have an activation. Over.
Lovely. Thank you very much, chrism. This is the last question. I need help. I'm into meditation for a while now, and when I meditate a lot, I find myself in a state where I don't need the world. I feel as if it's all nuisance going in the world. I feel tingling in my Agni chakra region, but only see flashes of light during meditation, and I don't know what is next or how to proceed further. Also, my emotional attachments for some people are an obstacle during meditation. Please help me and tell me what to do safely to develop this process.
Practice the safeties. Practice the safety protocols. Don't expect to have anything occur, and yet still do the meditation. If you're feeling like you don't belong in the world, or that the world is not important to you, well, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good, healthy thing. You're losing your attachment to dependency upon physical structures. It doesn't mean that you go so far into that you stop eating or you stop going through your daily responsibilities of life. It just means that you don't base your entire conscious premise and interaction with life on the attachments that most mundane people will continue to have, i.e., having to make money or having to live life in society in a certain way, type of things. And even though we all have to do that, even within a Kundalini awakening, which isn't bad, this is certainly not bad. This is what we must do. This is how we are able to survive in our societies. But you don't attach all the importance in the world to it like maybe some folks do. here in the Western democracies or pseudo-democracies. So practice the safety protocols would be the next best step for that individual. Over.
Okay, thank you, Chrism. So that's the end of the questions, unless anybody has something in the chat room they'd like to ask.
Okay, and until people start asking, or if they do, let's go ahead and get into some of these other areas. Getting back to the whole living from a divine perspective, I think this is really, really important for people to understand. Living from the divine perspective means that you begin to look at love without the normal limitations that people apply to it by applying a level of expectation or judgment upon the love that they give, but rather than, as Elizabeth and Laranya suggested, going into a level of unconditional love that stretches into divinity. And we don't know divinity. Even if you're Kundalini awakened or activated to a certain degree, you do not have full-on divine access. You have partial divine access, which is great, but you're semi-divine. You're not full-on divine. If you're full-on divine, you don't have a body anymore. Okay. So while we have a body, we are inside semi-divinity, and I think it's very important for people to start acting like that. Look at what Rosemary's doing. They're in the Minnesota, St. Paul, and Minneapolis region of Minnesota. She's going by. She's helping the homeless people actively. She's helping to spread the word of Kundalini inside of the populations of St. Paul and Minneapolis, which comprise about 1.3 million people. She's doing her best. She's spending her money. She's being assisted by Joey, who is listening right now on the telephone. Hello, Joey. She's being assisted by Joey to do these things. They're going around. They paper the coffee houses. They paper the yoga studios. They're online. They've got a Minnesota Kundalini Awakening group that meets once a month. I mean, they're really reaching out. They are living a divine life in the way that they are spreading the opportunity to live a divine life around them and in their communities. And I really suggest that all of you do the same thing. If it's possible within your abilities to maybe organize a seminar in your area, like Elizabeth Dalton Gonzalez did. She organized a seminar in the Washington State area, and Rosemary and Joey have organized many seminars now in the Minnesota region. And Santara has also done it multiple times in the Ireland area of Europe. I mean, this is very important. This is also living a divine expression. You begin to see the opportunity to give as many activated or awakened people the opportunity not to go into the psych ward, not to feel like they're crazy, not to get addicted to drugs. You begin to give the populations there where you live the opportunity to embrace the divine lifestyle, to embrace the divine unconditional love. You begin to give this from the grace of your own soul. This is living the life of semi-divinity, which, if you're Catholic, it translates into living the life of a saint. And let me tell you, saints, you don't have to have a pretty halo and a bunch of colored robes to denote a saint. You can own a construction company and you can run that construction company in as best a way as you possibly can. You can give massages. You can be a massage person and give, Kundalini infused therapeutic touch. You can work in a metaphysical bookstore and you can give people, really, really strong levels of Kundalini support and wisdom who come in looking for those very same things. You can be a homeless person on the street and just helping out wherever you see a need arise. This is living the divine life. And living the divine life means that you have the Kundalini up. It is either activated or awakened, and you are living from the activated Kundalini or awakened Kundalini perspective. This is what I'm talking about here. And if you're not awakened yet, then you can begin to live that divine lifestyle, which will encourage an awakening within you. So we're talking about three things at the same time. Much of the time when you're dealing with divinity, one meaning is not enough. Divinity will have 4, 5, 6, many meanings for one simple action, thought, deed, or scenario. It's very important for you to remember that so that you don't get yourself attached to logic and linear expectations. Okay, so live that divine life. Look at the life around you and have such appreciation. I had a student over at the ashram just yesterday, and they were meditating. All of a sudden, their eyes were drawn to a bee that had been caught in an old spider web where no spider was living anymore, and the bee was struggling. So she told me about that. We got the bee and very, very gently took the old spider web off of the bee's legs and then set the bee down to let Grace do what Grace needed to do. And then that's exactly what occurred. And so you reach in to the environment and you begin to appreciate all life forms as sentient beings. Native Americans did this a lot. Native Americans would have seen the life and the consciousness of a stone, or the life and the consciousness of an ant or a grasshopper or a bird or a wolf or a bear or a worm or a snake or a fish or a plant. And this is what you can do as well, because this is adopting a divine lifestyle. And you're not looking at it as if you're some sort of a caretaker of it. You're looking at it as a fellow mortal, as a fellow life conscious force of grace upon this world. And you treat it that way. You treat it that way. And so this takes out the option for any of the different kinds of death that humanity has configured to control the environment with. It takes out herbicides or fungicides or any kind of pesticide that people use because they don't understand, and they're not currently able to understand what it is to live a divine life, a semi-divine life upon this world. It's very important for people to realize that this world is a divine materialization of itself, and it is full of different evolutionary paths, not just the human. Take yourself out of the religious context and look at all life forms as having an evolutionary path towards divinity, and this is a fact. This is a fact. And use that understanding, use that knowledge that even as you partake of life to continue your life, that life that you've partaken of is now assisting you in your life towards divinity, and therefore fulfilling many different paths of evolution all at the same time within yours. Yes, I know. Clear as mud. Anyway, I would like to, and I haven't done this in a while, so I'm going to go ahead and I would like people to know where they can get some of this information. It's all free. You go to Kundalini or chrism.kundalini on the YouTube network, and you get about 340 videos specifically on the Kundalini. You can go to Kundalini Awakening Systems 1 at the Yahoo Groups network. You can go to Kundalini Awakening ! On Google+. On the Facebook network, you can go to Kundalini Healing Public, Kundalini Healing Private. You can go to Kundalini Awakening Systems 1, which is secret. You can go to Kundalini Awakening ! You can go to Kundalini Awakening Systems 2, Kundalini Awakening Systems 3, Kundalini Radiance Community for those of us who want to set up a Kundalini, an independent Kundalini community where people who having Kundalini can live and prosper and help each other and the environment and other people come into a life of grace, a life of divine expression, safely, without being, thrown into jail or thrown into a psych ward, things of that nature. We also have Kundalini People, another Kundalini group, and I invite you to participate in any of those groups. We also have Kundalini Virgins on the Yahoo Groups network. So we have plenty of opportunities for people to initiate their understandings of different vectors of Kundalini information coming through. We have people like Amelia Centaur, like Elizabeth Dalton Gonzalez, like Rosemary Goliath, and like Brooke Robertson, and many other people who have the Kundalini, who don't mind, these folks don't mind me saying their names. Other people don't want their names mentioned because of, how they live in the environment they live in. But there are many other people with the awakened Kundalini that are in those groups, and that you can participate with them, and you can use that knowledge to help you in your own process. It's not all about chrism. Not all about chrism. It's all about Kundalini. That's what it's all about. So I invite you to go to these places, and I want to say thank you to the people that are still listening in the chat room: Alana Seeger, Bruno Rodriguez. We have one guest left, Mary Jean, Vincent Cole was there for a little bit, and somebody named Wild Guide was there, and then we also have Santara, we have Joey, we have Elizabeth, we have Rosemary, and on the telephones. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. But also I want to say thank you to those who are visiting us in the archives. Hello, and thank you for that visit as well. It's much appreciated. I know the show reaches people, and so, the Kundalini will carry the show into the ears and the eyes of those who need to see it. And I'd like to thank, most of all at this point, is the person who is paying for this show, paying out of our own pocket with that, which would be Amelia Centaur. So thank you, Amelia Centaur, for allowing this show to exist.
Oh, I'm honored, chrism. Thank you. Thank you, listeners, and see you next week.
And we will see you next week, and I will go ahead and end the show the same way we started it, and here we go.